I want to go over some mistakes that I feel that I made with my first planted tank to try and help as many people as possible. Although I am only a few months into my journey with my planted tank, I do think the perspective of a beginner can help other beginners, because a lot of experienced people out there often overlook things that aren't obvious to beginners. So the first mistake is the stocking levels for this tank, and I do think it's overstocked right now, but it was never meant to be. This is partially due to an accident. Everything was going fine with the nitrogen cycle, but then the tank I was going to put the chili rasboras in started to leak water, and I haven't been able to fix that. So I had to put the chili rasboras into this tank initially as a temporary measure, but they really do seem to like this tank, so I want to leave them in there, so I'm going to be upgrading the filter options. But there are various stocking calculators out there to help make sure you nail your stocking as soon as possible to help avoid this mistake. So the second mistake I think I made was with the filters, and I spent so much money on different filters because there's so many different types and there's so much contradictory advice out there. I ended up settling with a cheap hang-on back all-pond solution filter and a cheap sponge filter, and I wasn't having any issues with the nitrogen cycle in the tank with that setup, and both of them put together were cheaper than the fluval filter that I bought for this tank that I really didn't like. So the cheaper filter options might actually be a better choice for you and your particular setup. So the third mistake is the hardscape, and I do absolutely love this driftwood in the tank, and my honey gourami definitely love it. There's so many little places for them to hide and peek their heads out to see if there's food on the go or not, but it just takes up so much space and it's constantly releasing tiny little wood particles, so there's always solids floating around in the tank from the driftwood. If I could go back and start this tank build from scratch, I definitely wouldn't choose this driftwood again. I would have had thinner branch-like driftwood with rocks and a lot more plants in the tank to free up the space, because the driftwood is just huge. The fourth mistake that I made is presuming that stock lights on aquariums are fit for purpose for planted tanks, and this definitely isn't the case after I've researched the topic. By complete chance, I was watching an MD Fish Tanks video and he used the smaller version of my kit tank as an example of what is a bad stock light. So that kind of rang alarm bells in my head, so I went off and researched everything, and I ended up settling on the Nicrew C10, and it's currently on 2 of my tanks. I'm very happy with it. It's very easy to use, and there's definitely been a marked increase in the growth rate of the Amazon frog bit in my tank as well as the algae, so I am working on the photo period to try and balance the algae growth with the plant growth, but it definitely does seem like a better light than the stock light that came with this tank. It also comes with a pretty easy to use 24-hour light cycle as well, but that does have a longer photo period, but the nighttime light settings on this light look amazing in my opinion. I absolutely love it. So the fifth mistake that I think that I made with my planted tank is focusing almost exclusively on epiphytes. I do have some moss and floating plants in here, but everything else is an epiphyte plant. I know that epiphytes are popular and they're often recommended for beginners, but that's not the reason I regret taking them. I wish I had something like Limnophilia or Rotala or something like that in here, a very fast growing stem plant to help me balance the nitrogen cycle in the tank. The next mistake that I think I made is with algae scrubbers, and I've definitely been on a journey with these, and I mean the things you use to scrub the algae off your tank glass. So I have tried a few different things, and I initially tried this little handheld thing, which is surprisingly good to be fair. It's just handheld, so in a big tank like this, it's a pain to reach certain areas easily. So the second one I tried was this scrub brush looking thing, and this was terrible. It kind of did the job, but it was just so much of a hassle. I really didn't like it, and it's so big and bulky that it was knocking my hardscape and stuff. The third one is this little razor blade one. It's very good at getting algae off, and it's really small. The problem is it can scratch your tank glass if it's not lined up perfectly, and I've scratched the front pane on my 8-gallon tank with this. And the final one that I absolutely love is these little magnetic algae scrapers. They're so easy to use. You basically clip one side onto the inside of your tank and then let the other side's magnet pick it up, and you can move it back and forth across your tank glass, and it just removes all of the algae quickly. It's very easy to use. I think I paid £8 for this, so this is like, what, $10 in the United States. So the seventh mistake I think I made is adding so many small Anubias plants. I'm thinking Nana Petite and stuff like that, the very small Anubias. They just seem very weak compared to the larger variants. I've mentioned in a few of my other videos I've had multiple issues with the smaller Nana Petite Anubias, with a lot of them either melting back, thankfully some of them are regrown slowly, or some of them having rhizome rot, but I haven't had any issues with the larger types of Anubias. So if you are wanting Anubias in your tank, personally, I'd recommend you go with the larger ones from my experience. The smaller ones just don't seem strong. So the 8th mistake that I think I made is the liquid fertilizers that I went with. So the first one I picked up was API Leaf Zone, and there's a lot of information on the internet saying this doesn't have enough macro or micronutrients to realistically help your plants. I tried it, and then I did move over to the Tropica products. Initially I went with the premium nutrition, but it does lack 2 macronutrients for your plants, presuming that your fish waste will be able to provide it. So then I switched over to the specialized nutrition product from Tropica because it's a complete product, and so far it's gone very well. And in all honesty, that's all I plan to use for my liquid fertilizer moving forward. So the 9th mistake that I feel I made is building the aquarium out on a cheap table that couldn't support its weight, and it didn't take long for the table to start buckling, and then I had to basically debuild the aquarium as much as I possibly could and then move it onto a sturdier table that could safely take the tank's weight. And the final mistake that I think I made was using sand as my substrate. I wish I went with an aqua soil or something like that, because it would be so much easier to start adding stuff like limnophilia or rotala to this tank without having to use root tabs and stuff like that to help support them. But the initial plan was to go heavy with epiphytes, which I've already covered earlier, and I wanted cories in here, and a lot of the initial advice that I read was saying you need sand for Corydoras, so that's why I went with the sand. But I definitely regret it now, and I really wish I went with a aqua soil product like I have in my other 2 aquariums. So hopefully this video has been helpful, and it'll help you avoid the same mistakes that I made with my own planted tank. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a good day.